My daughter-in-law laughed at my son right there in court. But the moment the judge saw me walk in behind him, he froze and quietly asked, "What are you doing here?" The entire courtroom went silent as my daughter-in-law and her smug family stared at each other in panic. There are moments in life that rip open old wounds you thought had long healed, moments that force you to confront a past you desperately tried to bury. For me, that moment arrived like a chilling slap across the face, right there in the courtroom, when the judge's eyes, full of a shock that mirrored my own, fixed on me as if he'd seen a ghost. The hushed anticipation in the courtroom died instantly the moment Judge Stephen Morales entered. He settled into his high-backed chair, his piercing gaze sweeping across the room. I watched him. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. When his eyes briefly met Michael's, my son, my everything, I saw a fleeting flicker of compassion, a tiny spark of understanding. But then it was gone. His eyes froze on me. That look, that raw shock, hit me like a physical blow. It was as if I was staring into a mirror, reflecting a past I thought was dead and buried. I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the defense table. My old leather briefcase, worn and scarred from years of battle, landed with a sharp thud on the polished wooden surface, a sound that echoed like a declaration of war. I pulled out the chair and sank down next to Michael, immediately reaching for his trembling hand, covering it with mine. The silence in that room was suffocating, broken only by the nervous scratching of the clerk's pen. Judge Morales leaned forward, his usual solemnity completely shattered. His eyes were wide, his lips barely moving as he whispered, almost to himself, "Why did you come here?" That question hung in the air, a blast of cold wind sweeping through every corner of the room. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, frowned, her gaze sharp with suspicion. Her parents, seated behind her, leaned in close, whispering furiously, their eyes burning with distrust. Michael, my brave, broken boy, slowly lifted his head. His eyes were confused, but in their depths I saw a fragile, desperate spark of hope ignite. Seeing him like that, my heart ached with a pain almost too deep to bear. He didn't know. None of them knew. No one in that room understood that I wasn't just a mother. I had been someone else once. Someone everyone in Chicago knew by name, someone they called the Queen of Law. Less than an hour before, the Chicago sky had been a heavy, suffocating gray. I stood by our old car, carefully helping Michael with each painstaking step. His gait was shaky, not just from the burden of his wooden crutch, but from the crushing weight of the crowd's pitying stares. The mournful tolls of the church bells in the nearby downtown square hammered against my chest, announcing a grim, dreadful day. My old leather briefcase was clutched in my hands, its worn edges a testament to the years I'd fought. It didn't just hold papers, it held our honor, our future, and the faint, flickering hope of my family. In front of the imposing courthouse steps, a small crowd had gathered. Curious neighbors, a few reporters with their cameras poised like vultures. They murmured amongst themselves, a restless, buzzing swarm. "It's the Villaseñor divorce," someone whispered, the words carrying on the cold air. "They say it's really nasty. Poor son." My heart sank at the casual cruelty, but I kept my face a mask of cold resolve, refusing to show any weakness. Just then, a luxury car screeched to a halt behind us. The door swung open, and out stepped Jessica. She was draped in a defiant red Gucci dress, a color that screamed winner to the world. Dark sunglasses hid half her face, but they couldn't conceal the arrogant, triumphant smirk on her lips. Her parents and brother followed, heads held high, walking as if victory was already their undeniable right. Seeing them made my stomach churn with a sickening blend of anger and despair. They had no idea what Michael and I had endured, the sleepless nights, the relentless struggle to keep our home. I gently nudged Michael forward, following him silently. My son, once a pillar of strength, now leaned heavily on his crutches, his back hunched as if carrying the weight of the entire world. Every hesitant step he took was like a fresh knife twisting in my heart. I wanted to scream, to shield him from those pitying glances, but all I could do was grip my briefcase tighter and walk with a forced, unnatural calm. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood and suffocating tension. Jessica was already seated at the defendant's bench, legs crossed, her bright red heels tapping a rhythmic, taunting beat on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. When Michael struggled in, her lips curled into a contemptuous smile. She leaned into her mother's ear, just loud enough for everyone to hear her chilling words. "Look at him. He's nothing but a crippled old man." My blood boiled. I bit my lip until I tasted copper, desperate to keep the rage from exploding. Michael lowered his head, his chest heaving with silent pain. He sat silently in the plaintiff's chair, his hands gripping his crutches as if they were his last tether to stability. Seeing my son, my proud, loving boy, reduced to this, it tore my heart apart. He was the child I had sacrificed my whole life for, the one who had promised to build us a home where no one could ever kick us out. And now he sat here, humiliated by the very woman who had claimed to love him. Jessica's lawyer, Jennifer Rivers, a woman I knew all too well, stood up, placing a thick stack of papers on the table. Her arrogant voice echoed, cold and calculated, "We will demonstrate that my client's husband, Michael Villaseñor, is no longer capable of fulfilling his duties as a husband and a father." Every word was a hammer blow to my chest. I wanted to leap up, to scream that they were lying, that Michael was still a father, a man of dignity, even if his legs no longer served him. But I remained silent, biding my time, waiting for my moment. The dense air in that courtroom carried me back to another time, to days long past. Years ago, when the golden sun still bathed our quiet stone streets, our small family had known peaceful days. Our little house, though humble, was always overflowing with laughter. I remembered those weekend afternoons when Michael, a mischievous 7-year-old, would run through the yard, clutching an old ball, singing at the top of his lungs the pop songs I'd taught him. My husband, David, was still a family man then, sitting on the porch, smoking, watching his son play with a serene smile. But that peace, I later discovered, was nothing more than a fleeting dream. One night, the aroma of the pot roast I'd prepared still lingered in the kitchen. David put down his knife and fork, his gaze icy, distant. "Linda," he said in a monotone voice, as if reading an announcement, "I'm leaving. I have another life." I stood there, a spoon still in my hand, stunned, as if I'd been slapped. He didn't look at me. He just got up, picked up the suitcase he'd already packed, and walked out the door. A gleaming car was waiting for him outside. Inside, under the dim streetlight, I could barely make out the silhouette of a woman. A wealthy widow, who I later learned had stolen the man of my life. Michael, then 10, stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide and vacant, watching his father's figure disappear. The fading sound of the engine left a silence that broke my very soul. That night, after clearing the table as if nothing had happened, I went into Michael's room. The boy was huddled under his covers, his small shoulders trembling with muffled sobs. I sat beside him, drew him into my arms, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. I told myself I had to be a rock, strong and unyielding, so my son would have something to hold on to. "Mom, why did Dad leave?" he asked in a broken whisper. I just hugged him tighter, choking back my own pain. "I don't know, son," I whispered back, "but I promise you and I will always be together." I kept that promise with every fiber of my being. Though every night, when he finally slept, I would be alone in the kitchen, staring at the clean plates, a pain piercing through me that never truly left. The following years were a relentless cycle of struggle. In the mornings, I'd wake before dawn, make breakfast for Michael, and take him to school on my old bicycle. During the day, I worked as an office clerk, my eyes fixed on the keyboard, checking numbers, trying desperately to keep my boss from noticing the dark circles from my sleepless nights. At night, while Michael did his homework, I would sit at the dining room table, hunched over the accounting books of some neighborhood stores, trying to earn a little extra. There were nights of heavy rain when Michael and I shared a broken umbrella, walking through flooded streets to get home. My clothes soaked, the cold chilling me to the bone, I would still squeeze my son's hand and force a smile. "We're stronger than this rain, aren't we?" Michael would nod, and his fragile smile was the only light in those dark, dark days. I never told Michael about the countless nights I didn't sleep, consumed by worries about tuition, rent, or medicine. Once, when he had a high fever, I had to search my purse in the middle of the night with only a few coins. At the counter, I counted the money one by one, my heart sinking at the agonizing thought of having to choose between my son's medicine or the next day's food. But I never gave up. Every time I looked at Michael, I told myself I couldn't fall, because he was the very reason for my existence. The day Michael received his acceptance letter for electrical engineering, I stood frozen in the kitchen, the paper clutched in my hand, crying uncontrollably. It was the first time in years I'd cried with happiness. But the joy soon turned to a heavy worry. College was not something I could easily afford. Silently, I took my wedding ring, the last tangible memory of a broken marriage, from an old wooden chest. It was the only thing of value left in our humble home. I took it to the pawn shop, and watching the owner weigh the ring squeezed my soul, felt like a betrayal of all my past hopes. "Mom, you don't have to do that," Michael said when he found out, his eyes red and pleading. "I'll get a job." I interrupted him, putting my hand firmly on his shoulder. "You just need to study hard. I want you to do what I never could." Michael hugged me, and for the first time, I felt he was no longer just a child who needed my protection. He was becoming a man. And Michael didn't let me down. After years of relentless effort and study, he built a 2-story house on the outskirts of Chicago. The day he handed me the keys, I stood in front of those new walls, tears streaming down my face. "Mom, I promised you," Michael said, his voice choked with emotion. "This is our house. No one can kick us out now." I hugged him, feeling in his strong body the sweat, tears, and immeasurable love he had poured into every single brick. For the first time in a long time, I felt I had done the right thing by not giving up. When Michael married Jessica, I thought my family was finally complete. Jessica, back then, was a sweet girl, her smile as lovely and innocent as orange blossoms. In the beginning, she used to come into the kitchen with me, cheerful, full of dreams for her future with Michael. "Mom, I want to have lots of kids, so you'll have a big family of grandchildren," she told me once, her eyes sparkling. And I believed her. I truly believed happiness had finally found us. I saw how Michael's eyes lit up whenever Jessica was near, and I silently thanked God for giving me such a daughter-in-law. But then, tragedy struck like a nightmare. An electric shock at a construction site, a terrible fall from high scaffolding. The call came at midnight, the foreman's trembling voice on the phone. "Mrs. Villasenor, it's about Michael. He had an accident. Come to the hospital immediately." I ran out of the house, my heart racing, barefoot on the cold, unforgiving streets. When I arrived, the image of Michael, motionless, wrapped in stark white bandages, was seared into my memory. I stayed there by his side, watching the son who had been the pillar of our family reduced to a being as fragile as a child. "I'm here, Michael," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Mom is here with you." The following months were an endless chain of agonizing days. Michael recovered slowly, painfully, but his legs were never the same. The doctor said he would have to live with wooden crutches for the rest of his life. From a strong, always smiling and talkative man, Michael became a silent shadow. He spoke less, and his gaze was often filled with a profound sadness. Every time I saw him leaning on his crutches, taking hesitant, painful steps in the yard, I felt like someone was tearing my heart out. When Michael came home from the hospital, it felt like the whole world had changed. The two-story house my son had built with so much pride, once filled with laughter, was now as silent as a tomb. I rearranged the living room, transforming it into a downstairs space so Michael could move around more easily. Every time I looked at the simple bed I prepared for him there, my soul ached. That room had been planned by Michael and Jessica as the future playroom for their children. But now it was just a makeshift refuge for a man fighting against his own broken body. For the first few weeks, Jessica still pretended to be a devoted wife. She would bring him a bowl of hot soup in his room, carefully serve his medicine, and even manage a strained smile when I thanked her. I wanted to believe she still loved Michael, that she was just trying to adapt to this new, brutal reality. But with each passing day, I realized it was all a facade. Jessica's patience ran out at a speed that astonished and sickened me. One early morning, as the first light filtered through the window, I saw Michael sitting in his wheelchair, a rare sparkle in his eyes. "Mom, I want to go to the garden today," he said, his voice full of a hopeful enthusiasm I hadn't heard in months. "I want to breathe some fresh air. Can you call Jessica to help me?" I nodded, relieved to see my son find even a small reason for joy. I went to the kitchen where Jessica was making coffee, dressed as if she were getting ready to go out. "Jessica, Michael wants to go to the garden. Can you help your husband a little?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle, neutral. She turned around, a sharp frown on her face, annoyance etched into every line. "Mother-in-law, I have a mountain of things to do," she replied in a cold, dismissive tone. "Can't he manage on his own for a bit?" Without waiting for my reaction, she slammed the coffee cup on the table and stormed out, leaving me standing there, motionless, stunned. I returned to the room and saw Michael still by the window, his gaze now cast down, his hands gripping the edges of his wheelchair, his brief joy extinguished. "Mom, it doesn't matter anymore." "Forget it," he whispered, almost inaudibly. I wanted to run after Jessica, to scream in her face, but seeing Michael, I could only push his chair toward the garden, forcing a weak smile to hide the pain that was breaking me inside. Family meals, which used to be the warmest, most cherished time of the day, had now become an agonizing trial. I tried so hard to cook the dishes Michael liked most, like chili or homemade soup, hoping to coax back a little joy. But Jessica would just sit there, barely eating a bite, then put down her cutlery, muttering that she had no appetite. I still remembered how she used to praise my stuffed bell peppers, how she would laugh, saying she wanted to learn to cook them for Michael. Now, instead, she looked at her husband with obvious annoyance, as if sharing a table with him was an unbearable sacrifice. "Jessica, are you feeling unwell?" I once asked, trying desperately to keep the atmosphere calm. She just shrugged, muttering, "No, I'm just not hungry." But I knew well that it wasn't the food that took away her appetite, but Michael and this whole family. Once, as I was passing through the kitchen to get some water, I heard Jessica's voice through the slightly open door. She was on the phone, her voice low but full of cold calculation. "Don't worry, as long as the house is split in two, we'll have enough capital to start over." I froze, my heart seizing up as if someone was squeezing it tight. The house that Michael had built with his sweat and tears. The house whose key he'd handed me with the pride of a son. Now it was becoming prey in her cruel plan. I wanted to push the door open and confront her immediately, but I held back. I needed time. I needed proof. I needed to protect Michael from this brutal truth, at least for now. Jessica started to change on the outside, too. The simple dresses from before were replaced by expensive, tight, sparkling ones. Her lipstick was brighter, her perfume so strong that I had to open the windows every time she passed by. She went out frequently at night, with flimsy excuses like a reunion with old friends or needing to relax for a while. I would watch her leave, her heels clacking loudly against the floor, and my heart would sink. I remembered the days when she still held Michael's hand, smiling radiantly as they talked about their future. Now, every time she left, I felt she was not only leaving Michael behind, but also the promises that once made me trust her. The neighbors' rumors started to reach me. One afternoon, while buying vegetables at the market, Mrs. Davis, the usual vendor, pulled me by the arm and whispered, "Linda, I don't want to speak ill, but lately I've been seeing your daughter-in-law a lot with a strange man at the corner coffee shop. They're very affectionate, laughing and talking like a couple." I forced a weak smile and thanked her, but inside me, the suspicion had already solidified into certainty. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were slowly, sickeningly fitting together. Jessica was no longer the sweet girl I once considered a daughter. She had become a stranger with plans I didn't yet dare to fully face. The worst came one late night when pain was tormenting Michael. I heard him groan softly in his room and call out in a weak voice, "Jessica, can you help me massage my leg a bit? It hurts so much." I stood outside the door, hoping, praying for a gesture of tenderness from my daughter-in-law. But Jessica sharply pulled Michael's hand away. Her voice, sharp as a knife, cut through the quiet. "I'm not your nurse. If you need care, hire someone to look after you." I stood there, my hand clenched on the doorknob, feeling as if a dagger had been plunged straight into my chest. Michael fell silent. He didn't answer, but I knew those words had wounded him to his very core. The house that once overflowed with laughter now sank into a thick, suffocating silence. Every night I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, my heart torn to shreds. I thought about the days when Michael was still healthy, when he would hug Jessica and say, "Mom, I found the person who will walk with me for the rest of my life." I had believed. I had hoped that Jessica would bring my son happiness. But now, the love in her eyes had died, leaving only contempt and cold, calculating ambition. Every time I looked at Michael, with his wooden crutches and empty gaze, I felt I had failed, not just as a mother, but as someone who believed in love and honesty. One gray afternoon, with the sky heavy with clouds, I had just put the water pitcher on the table when I heard the front door open, followed by the familiar clicking of heels. Jessica entered, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was Jennifer Rivers, whom I recognized immediately, an old acquaintance from my own days in court, now back with a cold, distant look. Jennifer wore an impeccable black suit, a briefcase clutched in her hand, walking with an air of power that seemed to dominate the entire room. I looked at her, and my heart shuddered as I remembered the days we sat together in the law office, sharing dreams about justice. Now, she was on the other side, not even offering a greeting, as if I were a stranger. Jessica, in a bright blue dress, sat in a chair without daring to look at me or Michael. The atmosphere in the kitchen became tense, brittle, as if a storm was about to break. Jessica pushed a stack of papers towards Michael. Her voice was dry, devoid of any emotion. "Sign here. We're getting a divorce. By law, this house has to be split in half." Those words were a stab straight to Michael's heart. I looked at him. His already pale face was now white as a sheet, utterly drained of color. His hands trembled, gripping the edge of the table as if trying to hold on to his last shred of hope. I placed the glass of water on the table, trying desperately to keep my voice calm, though inside, pure rage was consuming me. "On what grounds do you say this house is common property?" Jessica lifted her chin, her face so brazen it made me want to leap out of my chair. "We are legally married. All assets acquired during the marriage are divided in half. Don't you know the law?" Her words were a slap in the face, not just to me, but to the years of sweat and tears Michael had poured into building this house. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to contain my anger, and replied in a firm, steady voice, "You're wrong, Jessica. This house is Michael's own property. It was purchased and is in his name before you two were married. Legally, you have no right to it." The atmosphere in the room froze. Michael slowly lifted his head, and in his desperate eyes, a tiny glimmer of hope appeared. Jennifer, sitting next to Jessica, intervened, her voice as sharp as a knife. "Mrs. Villaseñor, in marriage law in the United States, there are clauses that allow separate property to be considered marital property after several years of cohabitation. You should be careful what you say." I looked her straight in the eye, the one who used to sit with me through tense trials, the one who used to call me Linda with respect. Now she saw me as an enemy. I answered her, word for word, "Jennifer, I know the law better than anyone here. The room fell into absolute silence. And then Michael looked at me surprised, with a spark of pride I hadn't seen in him since he left the hospital. But Jessica wouldn't stop. She jumped up, screaming in a shrill, desperate voice, "I don't care who you used to be. I just want to get rid of this burden. He's already an invalid, and I still have a future ahead of me." Those words fell on Michael like a hammer blow. He sat there, silent, his shoulders trembling, his voice broken. "Jessica, do you really think that?" She looked away, refusing to answer, and her silence was crueler than any word could have been. I felt as if my heart was being ripped out. Michael, my son, the pride of my life, was now being called a burden by the woman he loved. I wanted to run to Jessica, to slap her, to scream that she didn't deserve my son's love. But I just stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, fighting with every fiber of my being not to break down. Jennifer stood up, coolly leading Jessica out of the house, leaving the divorce petition on the table like a scar that could never be erased. The door slammed shut, and Michael and I were left in a deathly silence. I started to clear the dishes, trying to do something, anything, so I wouldn't have to face the raw pain that was crushing my chest. But my hands were trembling so much that I ended up dropping a porcelain bowl. The sound of the shattering glass echoed, mournful and sharp, like my heart at that moment. Michael was still sitting motionless, his empty gaze fixed on the divorce papers. "Mom," he murmured in a weak voice, "what did I do for her to change like this?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat next to him and put my hand gently on his shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "She's the one who's wrong, not you." But deep down, I knew the truth was even more painful. Jessica didn't just want to leave Michael. She wanted to take everything we had built. This house, where Michael had poured his sweat and tears, had now become the target of her cold, calculated plan. I thought of those days we walked through flooded streets, of the wedding ring I sold to support Michael's dream, of his promise to give me a home from which no one could ever kick us out. Now, all of that was in danger, not because of a stranger, but because of the very person Michael had called his wife. That night, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the insects chirping in the darkness. The cold wind blew, but I didn't feel it. I knew the real storm was just beginning. In the days after the divorce papers were laid on the table, the air in our house became so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. Every corner, from the wooden table where we used to laugh, to the hallway where Michael once walked steadily, was now just filled with an icy silence. I watched Michael, my son, eating his dinner in quiet despair, his hands slow as he brought small bites to his mouth. He said nothing, just lowered his head, his thin back casting a long, lonely shadow on the floor as he returned to his room with his crutches. I wanted to run after him, hug him, tell him everything would be okay. But I knew those words of comfort would now be like passing wind, unable to calm his profound pain. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. The faint moonlight filtered through the window, drawing weak lines on the ceiling. I thought of Michael, of all the years we had spent together, of the promise I had made to myself to protect him from all harm. But now, it was the person he loved most who was breaking his heart. I felt helpless, as if all my years of struggle had been for nothing. Finally, thirsty, I got up, put on a light jacket, and walked to the kitchen. As I passed the bedroom of Jessica and Sarah, my little granddaughter, I heard a murmur. Jessica's cold voice cut through the wooden door like a knife. "Sarah, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand?" Those words were a dagger straight to my heart. I stood absolutely still, my hand gripping the glass, almost dropping it. Sarah's voice answered, weak and sobbing, but I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy very much." Her voice trembled as if she was trying to hold on to the little love left in her innocent heart. Jessica replied harshly, with no patience, "If you don't obey me, you and I will lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and your invalid father?" I was there, my heart tight, feeling as if someone was crushing my chest. The glass in my hand trembled, water spilling out. Jessica, whom I once considered a daughter, was now forcing her own 8-year-old daughter to lie, to betray her own father. Rage consumed me, but along with it, an indescribable sorrow. Sarah, my granddaughter, whom I love like my own blood, was being pushed by her mother into a cruel, impossible choice. Silently, I stepped back, returning to my room before they could discover me. Sitting on the bed, I covered my face with my hands, trying to hold back the tears that were streaming down. I thought of Michael, of how he used to carry Sarah on his shoulders, laughing as she pointed to the stars in the sky. "Grandma, I want to be an astronaut," Sarah had said, her eyes shining. Michael hugged her and whispered, "You're going to make it, honey. Your daddy believes in you." Jessica wanted to take that love away, to turn Sarah into a pawn in her cold game. I couldn't allow it. I couldn't let my granddaughter grow up with lessons of lies and cruelty. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, I got up early, made breakfast as usual. Michael was still asleep, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken from so many sleepless nights. I watched him through the crack in the door, and the pain tore me apart. But I knew that day I had to act not just for Michael, but for Sarah too. I called the little girl to the backyard, where the orange tree, loaded with fruit, scented the air. Sarah came out with red, swollen eyes, her blue dress stained as if she had been crying all night. I sat on the wooden bench and pulled her to sit next to me. "Honey," I said in a soft voice, "last night I heard the conversation between you and your mom. You're very scared, aren't you?" Sarah looked at me, her lips trembling, and suddenly she burst into tears, hugging me tightly. "Grandma, I don't want to do that," she sobbed. Her crying broke my soul. "I don't want to leave Daddy. I don't want to lie. I just want to be with Daddy and you." I hugged her tight, feeling her small shoulders shake in my arms. My own tears fell silently, but I kept my voice firm. "Don't be afraid, Sarah. Your grandma's here. You won't have to lie to anyone. The truth is our most powerful weapon. Remember that." Sarah lifted her face. Her clear eyes, full of tears, looked at me intently. "But Mom says if I don't do what she wants, she won't let me see Daddy," she whispered fearfully. I dried her tears, my heart aching, but full of grim determination. "Your mom is wrong," I said with certainty. "No one can take you away from your daddy or your grandma. I promise you we will get through this. Just like your daddy, and I have overcome so many difficulties." Sarah nodded, squeezed my hand, and at that moment, I felt a new strength awaken in me. I was fighting not just for Michael, but also for my granddaughter, so she wouldn't grow up surrounded by deceit and fear. After that night, after overhearing Jessica's cruel manipulation of Sarah, my heart burned with a fire of anger and pain. I couldn't let my daughter-in-law turn my granddaughter into a pawn in her merciless game. But I knew that hurtful words or direct confrontations wouldn't be enough to protect Michael and Sarah. I needed proof. I needed a truth sharp enough to shatter the armor Jessica had built around herself. And that's how I decided to go to an old acquaintance from a life I thought I had buried forever. Robert Medina, an experienced private investigator, had once been my ally in the days when I myself faced the courts. Robert's office was hidden in a small, forgotten alley in Chicago, where the smell of old tobacco mixed with untold secrets. The room was tiny, dimly lit only by an old desk lamp, cluttered with yellowish folders and black and white photographs. When I pushed the door open and entered, Robert was sitting behind his desk, a half-smoked cigarette dangling from his hand. When he saw me, he jumped up, his eyes wide with genuine surprise. "Linda," he exclaimed, his voice raspy from smoke. "My God, how many years has it been? I thought you had completely retired." I smiled coldly, though inside I felt a dull ache. My past life, those days when they called me the Queen of Law, were now just a distant memory. But today I had to return to it, for my son and for my granddaughter. I sat in the wooden chair across from Robert and told him Michael's story in broad strokes, the accident, Jessica's callous transformation, the divorce lawsuit, and the horrifying plan to force Sarah to lie. Robert listened in silence, nodding slowly, his gaze sharp once more, like an old wolf scenting its prey. "I understand," he said in a low tone. "Leave it to me. But be prepared, Linda. Sometimes the truth hurts more than suspicion." I nodded firmly, clenching my hands. "I'm ready, Robert. I just need the truth, however painful it may be." A few days later, Robert met me in a small, lonely coffee shop on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a secluded corner, a cup of black coffee in front of him and a thin folder on the table. He pushed the folder towards me without a word. I opened it and felt my heart stop. The photos inside were chillingly clear. Jessica, in a striking red dress, on the arm of a burly, elegant man, coming out of a luxurious hotel on the Gold Coast. She was smiling radiantly, her eyes shining, a far cry from the cold, bitter face she showed to Michael. I took the photos with trembling hands, feeling as if ice was being poured down my chest. "His name is William Harris," Robert murmured in a grim voice. "A real estate mogul known for seducing women with promises of properties, only to take their assets later. He has an army of lawyers and powerful contacts who cover everything up." I looked at a photo where Jessica was wearing a sparkling bracelet I had never seen before. "This isn't just a fling," Robert continued, his voice heavy. "He picks her up, pays all her bills, from luxury restaurants to expensive dresses. I suspect this is a calculated plan, Linda. She wants Michael's house, and William is behind it." My heart filled with a terrible pain and surging rage. While Michael fought against every spasm of pain, trying to take hesitant steps with his damaged legs, Jessica, the wife he loved so much, was enjoying herself with another man, planning to take away the very home my son had built with his whole life's effort. I thought of the nights Michael stared out the window with empty eyes, and I wanted to scream against so much injustice. How far has she gone with him? I asked, my voice broken with suppressed fury. Robert sighed and shook his head. Very far, Linda. I found hotel receipts, plane tickets, and even bank transfers from William's account to hers. This isn't just a romance. It's a business. I paid Robert, asking him to keep watching. I need all the proof I can get, no matter how small, I told him in a firm, resolute voice. Robert nodded, his gaze full of understanding. You're still the same Linda I knew, he said. Tough as steel. But be careful, William is not an easy man to confront. I offered a cold smile, but deep down I knew I had no other choice. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a battle to protect my family. That night, I hid the envelope with the photos in the locked drawer of my room. I didn't want Michael to see them. I couldn't bear for him to face the brutal truth that his wife had betrayed him so brazenly. Michael had already suffered enough. The accident, Jessica's cruel insults, the pitying looks from strangers. I couldn't let another stab wound break his already fragile heart. During dinner, Jessica appeared, dressed as ostentatiously as ever. She sat at the table and, very naturally, proposed, Mom, I think we should sell this house and move to a more comfortable luxury apartment. Living here is getting boring, don't you think? I looked her straight in the eye, my gaze cutting with coldness. This house is the result of Michael's hard work, I said in a calm but sharp voice. It's not something you can sell on a whim. Jessica's lips tensed, moving as if she wanted to reply, but she just kept quiet and started serving food to Sarah. I looked at Sarah and saw her little eyes avoiding mine, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. She knew too much, but she was too young to carry that crushing weight. Seeing her, a new strength was born in me, not only to protect Michael, but also to shield Sarah's innocence from the scars her mother was trying to leave on her. The morning of the first hearing, it was drizzling. The drops fell crookedly, like my own silent tears. I helped Michael out of our old car, each of his steps heavy, not just because of the wooden crutch, but also because of the invisible burden weighing on his shoulders. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights, but he still managed a weak smile so I wouldn't worry. Mom, I'm okay, he said, though his voice trembled, and I knew he was trying desperately to hide his pain. I squeezed his hand tightly, trying to pass on some of my strength, though inside, my heart ached, dreading what was to come. On the other side of the courthouse, a luxury car screeched to a halt. Jessica stepped out proudly, dressed in a sparkling emerald green dress, a triumphant smile on her lips, as if victory was already hers. Her parents and her brother followed, laughing and talking loudly, as if they were going to a party instead of a trial. Seeing them, my stomach churned. They didn't understand the years of Michael's sacrifice to build this home. They didn't see the sleepless nights I spent protecting my family. To them, it was all a game, and Michael an easy, pitiful prey. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and suffocating tension. Michael sat on the plaintiff's bench, gripping his crutch tightly, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he wanted to escape all the stares. I stood behind him silently, waiting for my moment. Jessica took the defendant's bench, crossing her legs, her heels tapping the floor, each tap a cruel mockery. She looked at Michael coldly, without a hint of emotion, as if he were no longer her husband. Jennifer Rivers, Jessica's lawyer, stood up. Her firm voice echoed throughout the room. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Jessica Torres, has had to endure an unsustainable life alongside a disabled husband for many years. Mr. Michael Villasenor is no longer able to work. He does not have the health to fulfill the role of a husband and father. We request a divorce and the division of assets, including half the value of the house they have shared during their life together. Every word she spoke was like a fresh stab in my heart. I wanted to stand up, to scream that they were twisting the truth. But I held back, gripping my old leather briefcase tightly. Jessica nodded, adding a venomous phrase, her voice filled with open contempt. He's nothing but a burden. I deserve a better life, not serving someone who is worthless. Those words were a direct blow to Michael. He tried to stand up, his trembling hands leaning on his crutches, his voice broken with raw emotion. I can still take care of my daughter. I'm still Sarah's father. But his throat closed up, unable to finish the sentence. His face turned red, sweat ran down his forehead, and I saw his eyes fill with tears as if all the strength he had left was crumbling away. Jessica's sarcastic laugh erupted, cruel, icy. Look at yourself, Michael. You can't even stand up. Who do you think you're going to take care of? The entire room murmured, pitying glances fixed on my son. I felt my heart tearing apart. Michael, the son who was once my pride, now humiliated in front of everyone, called useless by the woman who claimed to love him. The scales of justice seemed to be tipping inexorably in Jessica's favor. And I knew, with absolute certainty, if I didn't act now, everything Michael had sacrificed, everything we had sacrificed, would be lost. In that instant, I stood up. I walked calmly, purposefully, to the defense table. I opened my old leather briefcase. The sharp sound of the zipper echoed in the silent room. I placed it on the table. I pulled a chair next to Michael, feeling my son's astonished gaze fixed on me. I took a deep, steady breath. Then I stood up again. My voice, clear and firm, resonated through the stunned courtroom. From this moment on, I, Linda Villaseñor, will be the legal representative of my son, Mr. Michael Villaseñor. The entire room fell silent, as if time itself had stopped. Jennifer was petrified, her eyes wide with astonishment. Jessica stared at me, her mouth agape, her face turned pale, as if she had indeed seen a ghost from the past. The older people in the room began to murmur. Some whispered, Linda Villaseñor. Could it be? I felt the wave of surprise spread, but I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Morales, who did not take his eyes off me. The judge gently tapped his gavel, his voice trembling, filled with a mixture of doubt and respect. Mrs. Linda Villaseñor, are you by any chance the Queen of Law? That question swept through the room like a sudden wind, unleashing a general murmur. Michael looked at me, his eyes wet with incredulity, as if for the first time he was discovering that his mother was not just a mother, but someone else entirely. The elderly present began to nod, murmuring among themselves about the stories of the past, about the woman who once made rival lawyers tremble. I nodded, my voice firm. Your Honor, I have never stopped believing in justice. Those words were not just for the judge, but for me, for Michael, and for everyone who now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and dawning respect. I felt the strength of past days awakening within me, as if the flame I thought had long been extinguished was rekindling. I looked at Jessica and saw her flinch. The triumphant smile on her lips had vanished. Jennifer, who was once my friend, lowered her head as if she knew she was facing an opponent she could not underestimate. At the next hearing, the atmosphere in the courtroom was as tense as a rope about to snap. The room was packed, reporters with pens ready, curious neighbors, all drawn by the news that the Queen of Law had returned, a rumor that had spread like wildfire throughout Chicago. I walked in holding Michael's hand, feeling my son's trembling fingers gripping my arm. He said nothing, but in his tired eyes, a spark of hope shone brightly. I squeezed his hand gently, wanting to tell him I was there, and that I would not let anyone take what was rightfully his. Jessica was sitting on the defendant's bench, dressed with her usual elegance, though her customary smile no longer had the same shine. Beside her, Jennifer Rivers, her lawyer, looked tense, clutching a stack of documents as if they were her last resort. Jessica's family, her parents and her brother, occupied the bench behind, but their laughter and loud comments from the previous day had disappeared, replaced by nervous, conspiratorial glances. I knew they too felt the tide was turning, though they didn't yet understand the full storm that was coming. Judge Morales entered with his usual solemn bearing. He gestured for me to begin. I stood up, opened my old leather briefcase, and took out a packet of carefully arranged documents. Your Honor, I said in a clear, firm voice, I present as the first piece of evidence the property documents for the house located on the outskirts of Chicago. All records clearly indicate that this house was purchased by and is in the name of my son, Michael Villaseñor, 2 years before his marriage to Mrs. Jessica Torres. I placed the papers on the table one by one, like laying bricks to build a solid wall of truth. The court clerk took the documents, reviewed them in detail, and nodded, confirming their authenticity. Judge Morales looked at them. He nodded too, and a slight gesture of approval escaped his sharp gaze. The room erupted in murmurs, the whispers spreading like a wave. The faces of Jessica's parents turned pale. Her brother lowered his head, and Jessica clenched her fists, biting her lips to contain her rage. Jennifer immediately stood up. Her voice still tried to sound haughty, though it was already trembling. Your Honor, although the house may be considered separate property, during the years of cohabitation, it became the family residence. According to the marriage laws of the state, this fact can be taken into account for the division of property. I interrupted her with a harsh voice, giving her no room to continue. Mrs. Rivers, the law is very clear. Common residence does not change the right of ownership over a property acquired before the marriage. This house is the untouchable asset of my son. The atmosphere in the room grew even tenser. Under the table, Michael squeezed my hand tightly, and I felt the warmth of his tremor. I looked at him, and in his eyes, that spark of hope shone again, as if for the first time in a long time, he truly believed we could win. But I knew the property papers were just the first step. I didn't give them time to react. I launched the second piece of evidence, a small USB drive containing something capable of shaking the entire trial to its core. Your Honor, I said in a calm but cutting voice, I want to present a recording made the night before the first hearing. I handed the USB to the clerk, and when the recording began to play, the entire room fell into a deathly silence. Jessica's voice was heard, loud, harsh, and cruelly distinct. Sarah, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand? Then Sarah's raw sobs were heard, but I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy very much. Then Jessica's voice hardened, without mercy. If you don't do as I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and your invalid father? The room was frozen. All eyes, a mixture of astonishment and indignation, were fixed on Jessica. She jumped up, her eyes wide, screaming, "That's false. She made it all up to defame me." But her voice trembled with fear, and I saw Jennifer put a hand on her shoulder, urging her to be quiet. Judge Morales raised his hand and ordered, "Order in the court. I want to hear from the direct witness. Call the child Sarah Villaseñor to the stand." Sarah entered with hesitant steps, her eyes swollen from crying, but clean and clear now. Seeing her, my heart broke all over again. She was only 8 years old, and she already had to stand between truth and lies. Jessica leaned forward, her voice sweet, but laden with desperate pressure. "Sarah, tell everyone you want to be with me, right?" The entire room held its breath, waiting for her answer. Sarah lifted her tear-filled face. She looked directly at Judge Morales and, with a clear and determined voice, though trembling with emotion, she said, "I love my daddy. I'm not going to lie. I want to be with my daddy and my grandma." The room exploded. There were murmurs and, incredibly, some discreet applause from strangers. Michael burst into tears, hiding his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I looked at him, and I saw that his tears were not of pain, but of the fragile, overwhelming happiness of knowing his daughter still loved him. Jessica turned pale and screamed in desperation, "The child is being manipulated. That woman brainwashed her." Her shrill voice found no sympathetic ears. I approached, hugged Sarah's fragile shoulders, and held her against my chest. I looked Jessica straight in the eye and said coldly, "The truth cannot be manipulated, Jessica." And the child chose the truth. Sarah snuggled into me, clinging to my clothes with her small hands, as if I were her only refuge. Judge Morales banged the gavel again and again to calm the room, but I knew the course of the trial had already completely changed. Jennifer bowed her head, unable to refute anything. Jessica's family remained motionless, their eyes filled with shame. I looked around and saw compassionate faces, heads bowing in a sign of respect. Suddenly, Jessica stood up again, her eyes crazed, and her shrill voice cutting through the silence. "Don't believe her. She's nothing but a failed lawyer. She lost a major case so humiliatingly that she had to abandon her profession. Who can trust someone like that?" Her words exploded like a bomb. The entire room stirred, the murmurs growing like a wave. Some reporters were writing hastily, their pens scratching the paper. I looked at Michael, who lowered his head, gripping his crutches tightly, as if fearing my past would ruin everything we had achieved. Sarah, beside me, squeezed my hand tightly, her clear eyes reflecting pure worry. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest burn with a familiar fire. Jessica's words were not just a blow to my honor, but also a desperate, final attempt to shake the confidence of Michael and Sarah. But I was not afraid. I had faced more venomous insults than that, and I had learned to turn pain into an unshakable strength. I stood up, walked to the defense table, and fixed my gaze on Judge Morales. My voice sounded strangely calm, but each word was as sharp as a razor. Yes, I left the law, but not because I was weak. Many years ago, I lost an important case, and it wasn't due to a lack of skill or evidence, but because my ex-husband and his wealthy lover bribed the judge. Every document, every argument of mine was flawless, but the final verdict was a blatant distortion of justice. My honor was buried under dirty money, and I decided to retire to preserve my dignity. The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes were on me, no longer with mere curiosity or pity, but with deep, profound empathy. Michael lifted his head, his eyes filled with fresh tears, looking at me as if for the first time he truly understood the whole, painful truth of what I had been through. I felt Sarah squeeze my hand tighter, and I knew my words were not only defending my honor, but also showing my son and granddaughter that I had never bowed to injustice. I continued speaking, my voice firm, without a tremor. That judge, years later, was investigated and sentenced to prison on multiple charges of bribery. And I, from that day on, swore that I would never again allow justice to be tarnished. Today I am here not for fame, but for my son, for my granddaughter, and for the truth our family deserves. I paused, observing the room, and saw the slow, knowing nods of the elders who had heard of me, of the Queen of Law from another time. Just then, Judge Morales leaned forward, gently tapped his gavel, and his eyes shone with a respect that was impossible to hide. "I can attest to Mrs. Villaseñor's words," he said in a grave and firm voice. "Many years ago, when I was just a young lawyer, it was Linda who defended me in a similar case. She has been the person who has valued the truth and the law more than anyone I have ever known." His words swept through the room like a wind, awakening murmurs of admiration. The reporters wrote hurriedly, and some whispered, "The Queen of Law has truly returned." I looked at Jessica. She was staggering, as if about to fall apart. Her pale face, her tight lips, no longer held the pride of before. Jennifer, her lawyer, just lowered her head and aimlessly flipped through documents as if accepting inevitable defeat. Jessica's family remained motionless, their eyes filled with shame, unable to look me in the face. I turned to Michael and saw him watching me, tears running silently down his cheeks. "Mom," he murmured with a broken voice. I put my hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently as if to tell him I wouldn't let him fall apart. Judge Morales stood up. His voice resonated with clarity. "The court will take a recess. The final verdict will be given at the next hearing." The sharp bang of the gavel sounded loud, like a final period to the truth that had just come to light. When we left the courtroom, the crowd parted to let us pass. Some strangers approached, murmuring, "She is so strong. Justice has finally spoken." An old woman took my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Linda. You have restored our faith that the truth still has value." On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. There was no longer even standing room. Reporters, neighbors, and even strangers from all over Chicago had come, as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of a story that had shaken every corner. I walked in, holding Michael's hand. I felt his trembling fingers clutching my arm. Sarah was by our side, her clear eyes reflecting worry, her small hands squeezing mine tightly, as if she were afraid of getting lost. I smiled at her, trying to calm her, although inside, my heart was pounding violently, as if I were at a crossroads of destiny. Jessica sat on the defendant's bench, her face pale, completely devoid of her former pride. Her elegant dress now seemed out of place, like a shell that could no longer hide her defeat. Jennifer, her lawyer, was beside her, her gaze lowered, her hands clenched as if trying to hold on to the last shreds of dignity. Jessica's family, her parents and brother, were also present, but they no longer laughed or talked as before. Their nervous, fleeting glances revealed that they knew the storm had arrived, and they had nowhere left to hide. Judge Morales entered, imposing, filling the room with solemnity. He sat in the main chair, his sharp eyes scanning every single person. The silence was absolute. Only the rustling of papers and the held breath of the audience could be heard. He cleared his throat, and his grave voice sounded like a hammer blow of fate. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the court delivers the following verdict. The divorce between Mrs. Jessica Torres and Mr. Michael Villaseñor is granted. The full ownership of the house on the outskirts of Chicago remains with Michael Villaseñor, as it is a property acquired before the marriage. The custody of the minor, Sarah Villaseñor, is awarded to her father, Michael Villaseñor, and her grandmother, Mrs. Linda Villaseñor. Mrs. Jessica Torres will receive no financial benefits and may only visit her daughter under judicial supervision. The room erupted. Whispers and restrained applause came from all sides. Michael broke down in tears, collapsing on my shoulder, his thin body trembling as if a heavy, crushing weight had finally been lifted. Sarah ran into our arms, hugging us tightly, her tears soaking my clothes. "Grandma, Dad, I'm staying with you," she sobbed, her voice a broken mixture of relief and pure joy. I hugged them with all my might, feeling the warmth of the two people I loved most. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not of pain. They were tears of happiness, of overwhelming relief, of knowing that our family was finally safe. Jessica jumped up, her face twisted with rage, screaming uncontrollably. "It's not fair. I'm going to appeal. You can't do this to me." Her shrill voice echoed, but no one paid her any attention. Jennifer put a hand on her shoulder and murmured, "It's useless, Jessica. We've already lost." Jessica took a few staggering steps, as if her strength had completely abandoned her. Her family stood up silently, heads bowed, and left the room without daring to face the contemptuous looks surrounding them. I watched them go without feeling a gram of satisfaction. I only felt sadness. Sadness for Jessica, who was once my daughter-in-law, a part of our family, but who chose the path of betrayal and ambition. A few days later, I heard the neighbors say that William, the real estate mogul behind Jessica, had cut all communication with her as soon as he learned she had lost the case. He no longer picked her up or paid her luxurious bills. Jessica had to live alone in a rented, run-down apartment on the outskirts, pointed at and rejected by everyone. One morning, Mrs. Davis, the market vendor, whispered to me, "Linda, I saw her packing her things. No one knows where she went," as if she wanted to run away from it all. I nodded, saying nothing. But deep down, I only wished that Jessica would find a new path, although I knew she would have to live with the consequences of what she had caused. Meanwhile, we, Michael, Sarah, and I, began a new life under the roof we loved so much. I devoted my time to taking Michael to his rehabilitation therapies, watching him slowly regain his self-confidence. At first, he was still shy, but every time Sarah ran to him, hugged him, and shouted, Daddy, you're my superhero. I would see Michael's eyes light up, as if a spark of hope was rekindled, burning brighter than ever before. I helped Sarah with her homework. We drew colorful pictures together, and every night, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of the dishes I prepared. Family meals, which had once been overshadowed by Jessica's icy presence, were now filled with laughter. Sarah told stories from school. Michael teased her playfully. And I would just sit there, watching the two beings I loved most, my heart warm, as if a storm had never even passed. One sunny afternoon, I saw Sarah secretly take my old high heels from the closet, put them on, and walk unsteadily, posing like a confident lawyer. "Grandma, when I grow up, I'm going to be as good as you," she shouted, and then burst into infectious laughter. Michael, sitting on the porch chair, watched her with eyes full of happiness and a profound sense of rebirth. I sat next to my son and granddaughter, looking at the orange tree loaded with fruit in the garden, and whispered, "Justice sometimes sleeps, but it never dies. It just waits for brave hearts to awaken it." Michael took my hand, his voice choked with emotion. "Mom, I don't know what I would have done without you. Thank you for everything." I smiled and gently squeezed my son's hand. "I only did what any mother would do," I replied, although inside, I knew I had done much more. I had fought not only for Michael and Sarah, but also for myself, for the promise I made in the darkest days that I would never allow justice to be trampled. The bells of the church in the nearby downtown square began to ring. But this time, the sound was clear, serene, like a blessing for our family. I looked up at the blue Chicago sky, with sunbeams shining through the tree branches. After the storm, we had finally found our peace. This house, which was once the center of such a bitter battle, was now a true home. The place where Michael was regaining his strength, where Sarah was growing up surrounded by love, and where I, Linda Villaseñor, knew that I had fulfilled my promise to my son and granddaughter. I stayed there, next to those I loved most. And for the first time in many, many years, I felt that my heart was truly at peace. After everything I've been through, I've realized that life can try to take so much from us, our health, our trust, even the relationships that once seemed strongest. But there are two things no one can ever truly steal from you, the truth and love. They became the guiding lights that pulled me through the darkest nights, giving me the courage to face betrayal and injustice head-on. I want everyone listening to understand this. In life, there will always be moments when you are tested to your absolute limits. But if you keep the faith, if you refuse to bow your head to lies, justice will eventually speak its name. And most importantly, remember that your family, the people you truly love, they are your greatest strength to overcome any storm.